All right. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Chuck Holton here, coming to you from my studio in Panama. It's been a busy day, but there's a lot going on, and I wanted to get to some news that I don't actually get to talk about a whole lot, and that's the news out of the war in Ukraine and Russia. Now, obviously, it's been going on for more than 3 years, and it's been a really grinding war of attrition, without a doubt, for the last two. Now, we're going to look at some statistics today that will help you understand better kind of where things are, because it's been going on so long, it's kind of dropped out of the news. And I know that there are not a lot of people that are actually interested in Ukraine, and there are even more people in the US, my viewers, who are less than ambivalent. They are, I wouldn't call them ambivalent, I would just call them antipathetic to Ukraine. And that being the case, I don't talk about it a whole lot because honestly, it just doesn't get the views. Nobody really cares. But I think this is something that we ought to talk about. And there's some developments that kind of are instructive for us. So let's talk about this, and we'll get to your questions as well. While you're at it, while you're listening, go ahead and post where you're watching from. What that does is it tells the algorithm on YouTube to show this live video to a whole bunch of people who haven't seen it before. And that's how part of the way that we've been growing the channel works pretty well. We grew by over 11,000 new subscribers in the last month. So that's awesome. And it helps. You guys are all about that. I mean, all I need you to do is just put things in the chat box and send your questions and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and everybody will be happy, including you. So there was just, I guess today, an article in the New York Times, which say what you want about the New York Times, but one thing they are is thorough. Sometimes they're thoroughly bad. Sometimes they're thoroughly incorrect. But in this case, they're reporting, they're making some good points I'm going to point out here. This is by Roger Cohen in the New York Times. He says, I'm going to quote here for a little bit. The United States will abandon efforts to end the war in Ukraine if it proves impossible to broker meaningful progress in the next several days. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in remarks that piled pressure on Kyiv as he departed Paris on Friday. So he was talking with Emmanuel Macron, President of France, Prime Minister of France, and in those remarks, he was saying, if it's not possible to end the war in Ukraine, we need to move on. Now, here's the question. What exactly did he mean by we need to move on? Now, at first glance, when I read that, because I figured that this was actually putting pressure on Russia to come to the table, because Ukraine has been at the table. Ukraine has been sitting at the table saying, we will agree to a ceasefire. We'll agree to this. And Russia's been like, yeah, we'll talk about, think about, maybe partially, potentially think about, possibly talking about starting the process of making plans to talk about a ceasefire at some point in the near future. That's basically been Russia's response. And I've said several times before, Russia has been, oh gosh, just playing the U.S. Like a fiddle. I mean, just mocking the United States. And in the way that he's approached this. They've said, oh, sure, well, we'll talk about a ceasefire. And then they unleash hundreds of drones and missiles on Ukraine the next day. Palm Sunday, last Sunday, they bombed downtown Sumy and killed like 34 people. So obviously, Russia's not interested in a ceasefire. I've talked a lot about why that is. Russia can't afford a ceasefire. They really can't afford to stop the war without completely winning it. They've painted themselves into a corner economically, and So they are making very incremental gains on the battlefield, very slow gains. And it's costing them a tremendous, just a profane number of soldiers. They're losing upwards of 1,000 men a day in Ukraine, if you can believe that. Okay. And they are, making incremental gains, but at what cost? Because their economy is in shambles. The sanctions haven't hurt near as much as they should have, but they have hurt. The Russian ruble is at a very low ebb right now. And their economy is increasingly militarized. I mean, meaning they have mobilized their entire economy to produce weaponry for the war. Apparently, a report out last week showed that the Russians have been using literally millions of shells. They've been buying millions of shells for their artillery pieces from North Korea and even from China, which goes to show that they can't crank out anywhere near enough shells to keep the war going just within Russia themselves. So they have to buy them from somewhere else. And if you wonder whether or not this is World War III, well, you've got in Ukraine American citizens who are fighting on the side of Ukraine. In Russia, you've got North Koreans who are fighting on the side of Russia, and some Chinese that they found, as well as people from Africa and the Middle East that have been hired to come and fight for Russia. India, was a story about Russians defrauding Indians by offering them jobs in Russia. And when they got to Russia, they confiscated their passports, put a uniform on them, and sent them to the front lines. And so these Indian troops are getting killed left and right. Russia, this is a race to the bottom for both Ukraine and Russia. Okay, I mean, this is just who can outlast. Now, Russia has the upper hand in terms of people, and because they've got a larger population, so they could theoretically keep mobilizing people and sending them to the front line. You could say that Ukraine has the upper hand in technology, without a doubt. Also, their military strategy and tactics is much better than Russia's. They don't lose anywhere near as many. They say that this is from open source, third parties that are not the Ukrainian government or anything. The numbers coming out about the number of casualties that Russia has suffered so far in the last 3 years is upwards of 750,000 people. That means that more Russians have died in this war by a factor of 3 or 4 than Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are pretty good about releasing numbers of casualties, much better than Russia anyway. And they've lost more like 100,000 men. Even that's profane. 100,000 dead is just sickening to think about. But compared to 750,000 on the Russian side, that's a drop in the bucket. And Ukraine puts a higher premium on their men than Russia does. Their men are better trained. And so one Ukrainian soldier in the scope of combat arms, if you just took combat power, if you could measure that in a person, Ukrainian soldiers are typically worth 3 or 4 Russian soldiers on the battlefield, because they have to be, because that just comes down to motivation. The Russians, the troops that are there, they don't want to be there. They have no reason to go die in Ukraine. They don't want to go be the next one on the meat wave assault, right? The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have no question. They're fighting for their homeland. They're fighting for their families. Many of them have families that are in occupied areas. And I've talked to a lot of those soldiers, okay? Armored Ghost says, better trained seriously? Yes, seriously. Because the Ukrainians have been receiving training from the West, and there's absolutely no question that that Western military strategy and tactics is far and away better by an order of magnitude than Soviet military tactics. And Soviet military tactics is what the Russians are still using. Now the Russians are they're adapting, they're learning from their their mistakes, and so they're becoming harder to kill. But I'll show you here in just a minute that it's not helping Russia's attacks in Ukraine all that much. Garrett says, how confident are you with the number of 100,000 soldiers lost on the Ukrainian side? Not saying I don't believe you. I've just seen much higher numbers. Well, I've been to Ukraine a lot. I've been on the front lines a lot. And I've seen battles where there are literally piles of Russian bodies and maybe 2 or 3 Ukrainians that get hit. I've been to Ukrainian cemeteries and seen the number of bodies. The Ukrainians announce the deaths in the paper often of those that die, or in the news. Russia does not do that. So, I mean, these Ukrainian soldiers, I've had them tell me these meat wave tactics are making me crazy. When I first got to the front line, I really couldn't wait to kill Russian soldiers, but they come in waves, just hundreds, and we just machine gun them down, and they all die, and then in an hour, another wave comes, and we just machine gun them down. He's like, it's boring. We're killing so many soldiers. The Russians have been caught bringing in mobile crematoriums on the back of trucks, and then pressing people from the territories they occupied, so Ukrainian people, pressing them into service to take the Russian bodies and throw them in the trucks to burn their bodies so that there won't be any evidence of them being there. And what they told me was, and this is, I mean, I have this on video, that we're cleaning up the bodies and putting them in the back of the truck, and there was a guy that was still moving, and so the Ukrainian guy called the Russian soldier commander over and said, "Hey, this guy's still alive. What do you want to? Should we get the medic over here?" And the Russian commander just walked over and took his pistol out and shot the guy in the head and said, "Okay, load him on the truck." I mean, it's unbelievable how brutal these guys are. So I'm pretty confident that I mean, the 100,000 number is soldiers lost on the battlefield. That's casualties. All right. Now, you have to understand, when I say 750,000 Russians that have been casualties, casualty means dead or wounded. So 100,000 is dead or wounded. Now, the number of actual dead in the battle on the Russian side is probably 250,000 or maybe a little more. Normally, there would be 3 wounded for every guy that dies. That's the typical ratio you get in a battle of this kind, conventional warfare. But since the Russians don't really treat their wounded, a lot more of them die. And if they are still functional, they'll just send them right back into the front. Just keep going until you do die. So they have no problem expending the lives of their people. No question about that. And so I am 99% certain that those numbers are fairly close in terms of 100,000 casualties on the Ukrainian side, 750,000 on the Russian side. The attacking force almost always takes worse casualties than the defending force anyway. But you add in the Soviet tactics, which are just, they put no premium on the lives of their soldiers. They treat their soldiers like the Japanese did in World War II, where they called their soldiers isengoren, which meant 1 penny. That's the cost of a postcard to send their family a death notice. And so they referred to their soldiers, the Japanese did, as Isengoren in World War II. Russia is very, very similar to that. And you don't have to watch a whole lot of the videos coming out of the Russian side of this war to know that that's very true, that they don't really care about their soldiers and that their soldiers are not very motivated. So if you have a well-equipped but poorly trained, poorly led, and poorly motivated force against a well-equipped, highly led, highly trained, highly equipped force on the Ukrainian side, you're going to have a lot more casualties on the Russian side. That's just arithmetic, really. Okay. So, yeah, Bass Guy says, sorry, Chuck, those numbers not close. Well, show me where you're getting your numbers. How much time have you spent in Ukraine talking to the people on the front lines? How much time have you spent there seeing it with your own eyes? Okay, interviewing people and making news about it. If you apparently you've been there more than I have. Is the U.S. highly likely to bomb Iran? Yes, it is. Okay, so there's Robin McNeil, walk away, no money, no weapons. Okay, well, let me just ask you this, Robin. Do you believe the United States should live up to its commitments to our allies? Yes or no? Should the United States live up to its commitments to its allies? If we sign a treaty and we agree to help somebody, we agree on some kind of mutual defense pact or whatever. If we sign a treaty, should we live up to the tenets of that treaty? Should we do what we said that we would do? Should we be people of our word? Okay? And if you think we should, then no more money, walk away is the wrong answer. If you think we shouldn't, well, that's a pretty immoral thing to say. It's pretty immoral to say that, no, we should not live up to our commitments. And like it or not, we have made commitments to Ukraine going back to about 2000. About 1990 or 91. Okay, and those commitments that we made to Ukraine were, you guys give up your sizable cache of nuclear weapons, and we will ensure that you are safe from attacks from Russia. Okay? Can you do the live in a Russian accent? Здравствуйте, товарищи. Я из Америки. Я хочу говорить по-русски. I'm trying to learn Russian. So, yeah, if you believe that the United States should live up to its commitments, then like it or not, we sort of have an obligation to help Ukraine, not just because of the commitments we made to them in the 1990s, but we made commitments to them again in 2008, in 2014, and in 2022 on. We've made a lot of commitments to Ukraine. Now, yeah, Europe has definitely helped more in terms of total dollars, okay, than the United States has. Now, the United States has given more military hardware, but the Europeans have paid more money total in terms of humanitarian aid and everything else. Bass Guy says, I'm sick of paying half my money for taxes and then funding wars we never win. Me too. And so that begs the question, we've already dumped $120 billion or more into the war in Ukraine to try to stop Russia from taking over Ukraine and then going for Poland and Belarus and Lithuania and Latvia, Estonia, which are all NATO allies. There's more of the agreements we've made that we sort of ought to live up to. Okay, so if you are sick of not winning wars, we could assist Ukraine in winning this war. No question. We could assist them in winning. If we took the handcuffs off, gave them what they needed, they could win this war. We could win the war for them, and Trump is doing some things right now to help with that, and kudos to him for that. And that is causing the price of oil to drop. As the price of oil drops, every dollar that the price of oil goes down, Russia loses about 4% of its government revenue, and that's what it uses to pay for the war. So a $20 drop in the price of oil is going to be good for you at the gas pump, but it's going to be very, very bad for Russia in the war, okay? And so there are lots of economic things that we can do to bring Russia to the table. However, what has been happening so far is that Steve Witkoff shows up to talk to the Russians with hat in hand saying, hey, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, we'll give you the other thing, and just giving them a bunch of concessions. And they've demanded literally nothing from Russia in order to come to a ceasefire agreement. Meanwhile, they've gone to Ukraine and have said, Ukraine, you've got to give up the land that Russia's already taken and more land that they don't yet control. Now, if you ask me, that's not really the art of the deal. That's not really good negotiating tactics here. They're letting Putin have the upper hand in this, and that obviously is, not good for anybody. Now, Wendell asks, has the new MOU regarding the rare earth minerals now changed the dynamics? Not really. Ukraine is like, look, we'd be happy to do business with America in a way that's very profitable for America, that pays you back for some of the stuff that we've been given. But you understand, of that $120 billion, not that much of it has actually gone to Ukraine. So about 80 billion, a little less than 80 billion of that has actually gone to Ukraine. The majority of it has gone to our partners in NATO to get them to switch over to American military equipment and get rid of their old Soviet military equipment. And so it goes in the form of loan guarantees. So we say, we will stand here with $4 billion ready to back you up, basically co-sign on a loan for new jets and tanks and things from the United States, as long as you promise to buy them from us. Now, we don't always have to come through and spend that money, but that's part of the $170 billion that's been pledged to Ukraine. And it's a large part of it. So those loan guarantees are not even money that's been spent yet. It's just money that's been pledged in case some of our NATO allies are not able to pay back their loans. We've also spent billions of dollars putting U.S. troops on the borders around Ukraine, putting U.S. troops in Poland, in Lithuania, in Hungary, and places like that. So we've had to basically build pop-up military bases and staff them and fund them and feed the troops and everything. And that is tens of billions of dollars we've spent on that in 3 years. And that all gets lumped into that $170 billion that was pledged for the war in Ukraine. But that's just feeding our own troops over there. So that's not, the Ukrainians aren't spending that. They're not seeing that money. And just understand the way that this works. Sorry, I'm late, I'm old. Is it true that Ukraine is forcing people to fight in the military? They are drafting people into the military, and so is Russia. You know how a draft works. You get a letter in the mail that says you have to report to the processing center to be processed into the military. And the United States has done that before. So they started by taking volunteers for the first 2 years of the war. They took volunteers, and they only took volunteers that already had military training. And then they kept saying, okay, now we've got to take guys with military training that are 27 and over. And now we've got, then the next tranche was 25 and over. The next tranche was 22 and over. Okay, and they just kept moving that down as they needed more troops. So I don't know that that's, people act like, the Russian propaganda comes out and acts like, oh my gosh, Ukrainians are just grabbing people on the streets and throwing them into vans and forcing them. Well, no, if a guy gets a draft card, gets a draft notice and doesn't respond, then he's breaking the law. And the police go knock down his door and grab him and throw him in the van and take him off to the thing. So you get drafted, you have to go. Okay. So I've seen the letters that they send out. I've seen copies of them. I've seen people have them show them to me. Here's my letter I got to send me off to the war. And there have been quite a few Ukrainian men who have fled Ukraine to keep from fighting or bought their way out. And there have been about 3 million Russian men who have done that and left Russia. So both sides are drafting troops against their will. And so Zelensky didn't look so good at the White House and put some people off. He should take a mineral commitment like he agreed to. Well, he didn't agree to what they were trying to get him to sign in front of the cameras. And that's why he wouldn't sign it. Because they did is they trotted him out in front of the cameras and all the press and then laid this thing down that basically gave the United States rights to all the minerals in Ukraine, which would have been completely selling out his own country. So while it would have been good for the United States, it would have been terrible for Ukraine. And Zelensky's job is to stand up for his people. Do you have a problem with Zelensky trying to do what's best for Ukraine? I don't. I mean, I think that it's admirable for a country's leader to go around the world and try to make deals that are the best thing that they can possibly get for their own country. And that's why I think it's good for President Trump to do this. So if President Trump going around and alienating our allies and bashing people that really like us in order to try to get better deals for America, if that's good, then why is it bad when Zelensky does it for his country? Why is Zelensky a bad guy for wanting to do what's best for Ukraine? I don't see that. I don't understand that. Maybe it's because I don't spend much time in the United States anymore and I kind of see America from the outside in instead of the inside out because I've spent 20 years now traveling around the world to war zones. But honestly, when it all comes down to it, the way I feel about the war is that Ukraine did not attack Russia. Russia attacked Ukraine. And I know that for a fact because I was there. And so Russia is the aggressor. The war would end tomorrow if Russia stopped fighting. And Russia would not have a problem. I mean, they could just go home and pick up where they left off. If Ukraine stops fighting tomorrow, Ukraine will cease to exist. So that should tell you everything you need to know about who's on the side of the right in this war. And if that you still look at that, you say, well, Russia attacked Ukraine, and if Russia stopped fighting today, the war would be over. If Ukraine stopped fighting today, Ukraine would be over. If you look at those facts and still say this is Ukraine's fault, well, I don't know what to tell you. But you're not going to like this channel. I can promise you that. Because look, MAGA Scott says, I think Zelensky is corrupt. Okay. You probably think that because you have heard a lot of Russian propaganda and you didn't know it was Russian propaganda. Suffice it to say, Zelensky, whether he's corrupt or not, are you saying that he's more corrupt than Vladimir Putin? Really? Like, can you actually make the case that Vladimir Putin is less corrupt than Vladimir Zelensky? If so, you're just not very well read. I would recommend you go read a book called Red Notice by Bill Browder. Okay? You read that book and then come back to me and try to convince me that Vladimir Putin is less corrupt than Vladimir Zelensky. But you know what? What you and I think about the corruption of those two people is irrelevant because Zelensky was not, I didn't vote for Zelensky, neither did you. His people voted for him. And Zelensky had a 91% approval rating at the beginning of the war. Now his approval rating now is down around 57, 60%, but that's still almost double what President Trump's approval rating is. And so the people of Ukraine want Zelensky as their leader And don't you think the people of Ukraine have the right to elect who they want? And you might say, oh, but they canceled the elections. No, they didn't cancel the elections. The Ukrainian constitution says that it's illegal for elections to be held during time of war. And if you say, so what? They should have elections anyway. Well, how are they going to do that when millions of their citizens are literally in occupied territory inside Russia or outside of Ukraine altogether because they're refugees and all across Europe and Armenia and all sorts of places? How exactly do you expect them to have free and fair elections if there are literally, a 10% of the population that is completely disenfranchised right now because they can't vote, because they're fighting on the front lines, they're behind the front lines, or they're outside of Ukraine? Okay? So I think what we're seeing here in this comment from Marco Rubio is simply the fact that the Trump administration is coming to the realization that stopping this war isn't going to be near as easy as they thought, because the Russians don't want to stop fighting and the Ukrainians can't afford to stop fighting. And so it's going to continue to go on until one or the other loses. And you tell me, who would you rather see lose this war? Would you rather see the aggressor who started the war, who has killed hundreds of thousands of its own people and over 100,000 probably of Ukrainians? Do you want to see them lose the war? Or do you want to see the country that didn't attack anybody, that is trying to fight for its own survival, that is, an ally that we had agreements with before the war started? Do you want to see those guys lose instead? Really? What's the reason Putin wants Ukraine? Unicorn Harry says Putin wants Ukraine for a couple of reasons. First of all, the natural gas that's in the Donbas region was going to be a major competitor to Russian natural gas for the European market. Now, that's all become sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, it's the Russians are not going to sell natural gas to Europe anytime soon, at least not much. And so that was one reason. The other reason is the demographic decline inside Russia is so bad, they need to assimilate more people into their country. And who better than the Ukrainians, since they're one people, right? And so Robin says, I'm late. Is this the end? No, it's not the end. Well, let's see. No, I've got about 10 minutes left. Okay, so I think, this is Marco Rubio admitting, well, we couldn't stop the war in 24 hours. We couldn't stop it in 100 days. And as long as Russia is not even willing to be serious in talking about a ceasefire, we're not going to get a ceasefire. And just like Joe Biden put more pressure on Israel in order to get a ceasefire with Hamas than he did on Hamas. And you know how gross that was? You remember back when Biden was in the presidency, how he would, withhold stuff from Israel in order to pressure them to come to a ceasefire agreement. And he would not give them the ammo they needed, not give them, or not even sell them the weapons they needed. You remember how gross and disgusting that was? Well, that's exactly how Russia is, how the Trump administration is treating Ukraine right now. It's just as gross. If it was gross when Biden did it to Israel, then it's gross when Trump does it to Ukraine. I'm sorry. Okay? And so, it wasn't entirely clear from Rubio's remarks whether he was actually talking about Russia or Ukraine. And I guess maybe that was by design to kind of put pressure on both of them. But I'm telling you right now, Russia can't afford to stop the war. They've got to either win it or die trying. And so this has become an existential issue for Russia where it wasn't at the beginning. Chuck, how would things have played out differently if Zelensky had agreed to the minerals deal at the White House? I don't think it would have played out a whole lot differently at all. Now, it would be smart for Zelensky to agree to it. I think the thing is, Zelensky's got whiplash when it comes to dealing with the when it comes to dealing with the presidency of the United States, because he got used to dealing with Biden. You know, you suck up to Biden and you get what you need for your country. Okay, so he learned how to do that. I happen to know on pretty good authority that Zelensky really was pretty disgusted by Joe Biden, didn't like Joe Biden at all personally, but he played ball with Biden to try to get what he needed. But then trying to use that tactic with Trump doesn't work. It's a different, it's a whole different thing. Trump respects strength, not capitulation. So when Zelensky realized that and started saying, no, I'm not going to just go along to get along, well, it sort of upset J.D. Vance, I think, more than it upset Trump. But what Vance did in that meeting with the two of them was really gross, was beneath his office, and dressing down the president of a country when he's your guest in the White House is pretty gross. And did you ever say thank you? Look, Zelensky has said thank you so many times to the United States. I've literally heard it from his mouth. I've spoken with Zelensky and heard how thankful he is to the United States for what the U.S. has done to help. And so pretending that he hadn't said thank you was just, kind of disgusting. Making fun of Zelensky because of his clothing is absolutely gross and inappropriate. If you did a 30-second Google search, you'd know why Zelensky wears the military outfit that he wears, because at the beginning of the war, he stood up and made a speech and made a commitment to his people and said, I will not be jet-setting around, whining and dining with international leaders while my people are fighting in the field. I'm going to wear this uniform for the rest of the war until the war is over, to show solidarity with our troops who are on the front line. So this is my way of showing the troops I remember what they're doing. I know where they are. I'm paying attention, and I'm out fighting for you. And he literally said in the speech, if I look like an idiot to the rest of the world, that's fine. You all, my constituents, my voters, will know why I'm wearing a sweatsuit when I go around the world. That is the reason that he did it. So for our president to make fun of him for that, I think just shows a really dearth of leadership. It's good leadership to identify with your troops. It's bad leadership to make fun of somebody for identifying with their troops. Does that make sense? Now, I'm being kind of harsh on President Trump here. You know that I'm a pro-Trump guy, but I reserve the right to criticize things that are done that I think are immoral, especially. Okay, and yeah, that whole meeting in front of the press was a clown show. It should never have happened. It wasn't Zelensky's fault that it happened. Zelensky got dragged out there against his will. Okay, and no, Zelensky. So Arlene says Zelensky feels entitled. Let me explain that a little bit. Volodymyr Zelensky sees this war a little differently than you and I, perhaps. The way they see it, we are fighting America's biggest adversary and degrading their capabilities for 3 years. We've lost 100,000 casualties, thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed, civilians. About 200,000 Ukrainian children have been stolen from their families and shipped into Russia and adopted out to Russian families because they're running out of people. And now we're at the point where some of the older children that were kidnapped and sent to Russia are being drafted and put in uniforms and sent to fight their own people. Okay? So you have that side, right? And so Zelensky is like, we've paid a lot in blood to degrade the Russian military threat. And that's a favor to the Europeans and even to the United States. The US has learned so much about Russian capabilities from this war that it has completely changed our procurement process in the US military because we realized we were spending money on all the wrong things. And that's thanks to the sacrifices of the Ukrainian soldiers. So the way Zelensky sees it, hey, it's real kind of you guys to give money to help this, but the Ukrainians are paying in blood. And all you're doing is giving money. So it's maybe not such a superior subordinate relationship in their eyes. It's more of a peer-to-peer relationship. We're doing the heavy lifting. We're doing the bleeding and dying. All we're doing is asking you for a little bit of money. Okay? And honestly, the sum total of money that the United States has spent in the war in Ukraine, that we've actually spent in Ukraine, amounts to about 10% of 1 year of the U.S. defense budget. And we've done that in more than 3 years. Okay? So in the greater scheme of things, we waste a lot more money on a lot of other things. And the money that we're spending, I believe, the money that we're spending in Ukraine should not be wasted. So let me ask you, do you think we ought to walk away and just waste the money that we've already spent trying to help Ukraine? Or if we're in for a penny, we're in for a pound, and we're going to just see it through? Look, wars always last longer than they should. They always last longer than you want them to. But they will not stop until somebody wins. And again, I'll just ask you, who do you want to see win? Do you want to see the country that attacked its neighbor, kidnapped 200,000 children, killed tens of thousands of civilians, continues to bomb civilian areas? You want to see them win? Or do you want to see the country that's fighting for its own survival win? You tell me, okay? Now, Valentine Patriot says, my question is, why is my question valuable? Why did Zelensky shut down churches? Okay, I'll explain. There are obviously a bunch of churches in Ukraine. One of the denominations that was very big in Ukraine at the beginning of the war was the Russian Orthodox Church. There was a split between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church many years ago. And the Russian Orthodox Church continued. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church split off, and they did their own thing. Kind of like the Lutherans and the Methodists or something, And so when the war started, Ukrainian intelligence services were going around Ukraine with radio receivers and picking up radio communications, trying to find out, because there were a lot of saboteurs that Russia had sent into Ukraine who were running around Ukraine causing havoc. They were, just saboteurs that were running around, starting things on fire, causing problems, setting bombs and stuff like that. So the Ukrainian intelligence services went around with these radio receivers trying to listen in on the signals that were getting sent into Russia back and forth, giving these saboteurs their instructions. And here's what they found. a lot of those instructions, a lot of those radio signals were emanating from Russian Orthodox churches all around Ukraine. And so when they investigated, they found out that Russia had replaced the priests in the Russian Orthodox Church with members of the FSB. And so FSB members were posing as priests, but were collecting intelligence on Ukrainian troop movements and dispositions and stuff like that, and were sending that information into Russia. So they decided to shut down the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And now Russia used that as propaganda to say Volodymyr Zelensky is outlawing the Christian church in Ukraine. Not true. The Baptist church is still open. The Church of God is still open. The non-denominational churches are still open. How do I know? Because I go to those churches when I'm in Ukraine. Every Sunday, I go to church in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is open. The only churches that are closed are the Russian Orthodox churches. And they're closed because they were being militarized. They were being weaponized. And if Russia's going to do that, then Ukraine has every right to close them. Listen, if we found out, if a news story came out that a mosque in Dearborn, Michigan was collecting intelligence data on the U.S. military, let's say they were spying on a U.S. military base, and we found out that they were taking that data back to a mosque in Dearborn, Michigan, and then sending it to Iran, do you think we'd be justified in shutting down that mosque? I think so. I think that justifies shutting down the mosque. And so if that is true, then what Ukraine did was justified in shutting down the Russian Orthodox churches as well. Does the UE get paid back for money they give to Ukraine? The EU? No, they don't. I mean, not yet. There will, I mean, obviously, what Ukraine's trying to do is become a member of the EU, and then there would be a lot of economic benefits for the European Union once that happens. Now, the United States is not against Ukraine becoming a part of the EU, per se. They're against them becoming a part of NATO. So if you understand the difference between the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union, those are two separate things. I've been sort of horrified because I've had so many people that send me emails and stuff that obviously don't understand that the UN, the EU, and NATO are three completely separate things. They think they're all kind of one and the same. It's important to kind of understand that they are separate things. Okay, I've got to hurry up and get going, folks. So Chris says this isn't our fight. I'll just ask you again, Chris. Do you believe the United States should live up to its agreements? If we make contracts, if we make agreements with other countries, should we stand by those agreements? Should we be good for those agreements? If not, then nobody will ever trust America again. And making America untrustworthy on the world stage, not exactly good foreign policy, if you ask me. Okay? So folks, make sure that you like and subscribe to this video. Peter Ortiz says, why don't they have to pay us back? Because we're not, I mean, some of it they do. Some of it that we've given them is loans that they have to pay back. But some of it is not loans, it's donations, because in some sense, America believed under the last administration that these agreements, okay, in some sense, we believed that Ukraine was doing good things that were in America's interests, okay? But like I said, a lot of that money never even went to Ukraine. It went to our allies in NATO. It went to our own troops in the region, okay? Cal Fortune says, unless you can point to a treaty ratified by U.S. Congress, you have no argument. Really? So you think if Trump says we're going to do something, should we live up to that? If Trump goes and signs an agreement with I don't know, Saudi Arabia? Should we stand by that agreement, or is that agreement null and void unless there's a written treaty ratified by Congress? I mean, we just signed an agreement with Panama to put U.S. troops down here in Panama. Do you think Panama ought to stick to that agreement that they signed with us? Or because it hasn't been ratified by the Congress of Panama, that they are free to just walk away from it? Okay? The Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Point, period, end of story. It doesn't say anything about Congress ratifying a treaty. It says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so I think the U.S., I believe, my opinion is that the U.S. should act in a way that's honorable in all of its dealings with allies and adversaries alike. We should be honorable, okay? And I don't think it's honorable for us to make agreements, whether or not they're ratified by Congress, make agreements, and then walk away from those agreements. Now, we can renegotiate. We can say, all right, this agreement's been out there for 20 years. Let's take a fresh look at this and let's renegotiate this, all right? But if we made agreements to help Ukraine in time of trouble, and even if we didn't, we have for the last 3 years, do you think we should just walk away from all that money? And then just, I mean, it would have been better at that point if we had never given them $1 and we had just let Ukraine fall and become part of Russia, and then let Poland fall and become part of Russia, and then let Lithuania fall. Because, you know, we have this Article 5 in NATO that we belong to that says if Poland gets attacked, we have to go to their defense. But should we just walk away from that because we don't like them, right? Look, I just believe, I don't think this is hard to understand. I think that we should make our decisions based on the morality of the situation first. And that's the way to be honorable in every situation. And when you look at the situation in Ukraine, I want to show you real quick. I got to hurry because I got to get going to dinner. We have a tour group here of Hot Zonians who are going to be waiting for me in a second. But I want to show you this map. This is tracking the war. I got to make it a little smaller. Hang on. Tracking the war through graphs. All right. And this is from War Mapper. And this is very interesting to me. All right. If you go down here and you see, this is overall control of Ukraine starting back in February of 2022. So you see that Russia took over. The area in yellow belongs to Ukraine. The area in purple is the part of Ukraine that Russia was occupying before the war started in 22. And the part in red is the part that we're paying attention to here. The part in red is what Russia has taken at the beginning of the war. So beginning of the war, they took February and March. They did pretty well. Then you see August, September, October, November, they start losing ground. And then it stayed pretty much constant. And this goes all the way to March 25. And you look, go back and look at the total amount of territory that Russia controls inside Ukraine. Go back to November 2022. And as I scroll down, that's right here. This is November 2022. They had 10.56%. And you come down here to March 2025, and they have 11.25%. That is a stalemate, folks. That right there is a stalemate. And so Russia has been losing 1,000 men a day since November 2022, more or less, about an average of probably 800, 900 a day. And for what? Because, and for 1% more of Ukraine, at the rate they're going, it's going to take them more than 60 years to take over Ukraine, and they'll lose millions of soldiers. And obviously they can't do that. That's not feasible for Russia. So right now, it's not feasible for Russia to win in Ukraine, but they're still fighting. And as long as they're still fighting, people are going to be still dying. And so the way to pursue peace in Ukraine is to do what we have to do to let Ukraine win. At point, period, end of story. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right, folks. Thank you very much for watching. I got to run. We've got about 17, 18 people here. What is Zelensky's approval rating with his people? It's about 57% right now. Quite a bit higher than President Trump's 40-something percent. Okay, so let's pray for Ukraine and for this war, and that the killing will stop, and then we'll go. Lord God, I come to you right now and just ask, Father, that you would put a stop to the war in Ukraine. Lord, I pray that you would stifle and stymie the plans of evil men, that you would cause them to fall on their own traps, as it says in the Psalms. Lord, I pray that you would uphold the righteous that are involved there. And if there's none righteous, then I guess we trust you to do the right thing. Just give us wisdom and discernment. Give us a heart for the people who are suffering on both sides. And I pray, Lord, that whatever the United States does in this conflict, that we would help the Ukrainians come out whole and save their country. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, folks, I got to run. God bless you. We'll see you guys later. And thanks for watching.